You're lying on a cold steel bunk in Texas's Polunsky Unit death row, staring at the concrete ceiling, and as Ramiro Gonzales once put it, you're literally waiting to die. On a freezing January night in 2001, deep in the dusty backroads of rural Medina County, an 18-year-old desperate addict, just 71 days past his birthday, spiraled into a nightmare. Ramiro Gonzales needed drugs badly. Bridget Townsend, the sharp, 18-year-old girlfriend of a local drug dealer, caught him in the act and stood in his way. What followed was unthinkable abduction, rape, and 2 gunshots that silenced her forever. Her body was dumped and buried in the scrubland of a remote ranch. Over a year later, already serving life for another crime, Gonzales shocked everyone by confessing everything from his cell, then leading police straight to her hidden grave. Death sentence followed swiftly. Nearly 18 years on death row, letters of profound remorse, a miraculous transformation through faith, even the prosecution's own expert retracting his testimony, and a selfless push to donate a kidney to a stranger. Yet on June 26, 2024, he was strapped to the gurney and lethally injected, on what would have been Bridget's 41st birthday. Was he a born monster, or forged by a childhood of abuse, addiction, and abandonment? And the question that haunts us all, can someone truly change before justice demands its final price?
You're literally waiting to die.
It doesn't bother me. It's something I accepted a long time ago.
It's the night of January 14, 2001, though the crime spills into the early hours of the 15th. In the rugged heart of rural Medina County, Texas, just west of Bandera, deep in the Texas Hill Country. The air is biting cold, the kind of winter chill that seeps through thin walls and turns breath to frost. Stars blanket the vast black sky, unbroken by city lights, while cedar thickets and scrub oak cast long, jagged shadows across empty dirt roads. 18-year-old Bridget Townsend is home alone in a modest house on the outskirts of town. She's warm, hearted, trusting, the kind of young woman everyone in the small community describes as loving and full of life. Her boyfriend, Joe Leal, a local drug dealer, is away working his shift. Bridget answers the phone that night expecting maybe a friend, or Joe checking in. On the other end is Ramiro Gonzales, also just 18, but a world apart in desperation. Only 71 days into legal adulthood, Gonzales is already deep in the grip of cocaine addiction. His childhood of neglect, sexual abuse, and loss has funneled into a spiraling need for the next hit. He's broke, shaking, and fixated on one thing: getting drugs. He knows Joe Leal keeps cash and cocaine at the house, so he calls, fishing for information. Bridget, unsuspecting, tells him Joe isn't home and she's there by herself. That's all he needs to hear. Gonzales grabs a pistol, jumps into his vehicle, and drives the dark backroads toward Leal's place. His original plan, he would later claim, was simple: break in, steal the drugs and money while no one was around to stop him, then disappear into the night. But Bridget is there. The moment he realizes the house isn't empty, everything shifts from calculated theft to pure impulse. He forces his way inside. What happens next unfolds in a blur of terror. Gonzales binds Bridget's hands with a cord or belt. He isn't thinking clearly, just reacting. Panic surges on both sides. She pleads, fights back as best she can, but he overpowers her. He forces her into his vehicle and drives her away from the house, deeper into the isolated countryside, toward a remote cedar-covered area near his family's ranch land. Scrub brush, limestone outcrops, and thick juniper thickets that swallow sound and hide everything. In that desolate spot, far from any road or neighbor, the crime escalates into unimaginable horror. Gonzales sexually assaults Bridget. Then, in a moment prosecutors would later describe as cold elimination of a witness, and Gonzales himself would call sheer panic, he raises the gun and fires twice into her head. The shots echo briefly through the cedars, then silence returns. Bridget Townsend, vibrant and only 18, lies lifeless on the cold Texas ground. Gonzales digs a shallow grave in the rocky soil, buries her body beneath brush and dirt, and drives away. He believes no one will ever connect him to the disappearance. For over a year, Bridget remains a missing person, her family clinging to hope, the community whispering theories. while her remains lie hidden just miles from home. What began as a desperate addict's plan to steal drugs had, in a cascade of impulsive, escalating decisions, become abduction, rape, and murder. It was not a meticulously planned execution. It was a nightmare born of addiction, opportunity, and terror spiraling out of control on a freezing winter night in rural Texas. In the days following January 15, 2001, the quiet rural communities of Medina and Bandera counties woke to devastating news. 18-year-old Bridget Townsend had vanished without a trace. Her family reported her missing immediately. Bridget's mother, Patricia Townsend, and the rest of her loved ones plunged into the agonizing limbo that families of the missing know all too well. No body, no crime scene, no solid leads. Just an empty house, a few scattered belongings, and endless questions. Searches were organized across the rugged hill country. Terrain volunteers combed cedar thickets, dry creek beds, and remote ranch lands on foot and horseback. Flyers with Bridget's smiling photograph, bright eyes, warm expression, were plastered on telephone poles, store windows, and gas stations throughout South Texas. For nearly 2 years, the case remained a haunting mystery. Bridget's family clung to hope, even as fear gnawed deeper. Her mother later spoke of the torment, sleepless nights, constant dread, the cruel uncertainty that prevents closure. We just wanted to know where she was. Patricia would say years later. The sheriff's office investigated every tip, runaway theories, possible foul play linked to Joe Leal's drug connections. But nothing broke. No physical evidence surfaced. Bridget became one of Texas's many unresolved missing persons cases, her face a fixture on local news segments pleading for information. Meanwhile, Ramiro Gonzales carried on with his life, spiraling deeper into addiction. But the crime wasn't entirely buried for him. In a chilling detail that emerged later, Gonzales admitted to returning to the remote burial site multiple times, driven, he claimed, by a disturbing obsession, perhaps guilt mixed with compulsion. He would stand over the shallow grave hidden in the brush, alone with what he had done. Then, in September 2001, just 8 months after Bridget's murder, Gonzales struck again. This time, his victim was Florence Tate, a 47-year-old real estate agent showing a rural property in Bandera County. Gonzales abducted her at gunpoint, sexually assaulted her, and left her bound. Miraculously, Tate escaped, running for help and providing a clear identification of her attacker. This crime finally put Gonzales behind bars. Arrested and facing overwhelming evidence, he pleaded guilty to the aggravated kidnapping and sexual assault of Florence Tate. In October 2002, a judge sentenced him to 2 concurrent life terms. With no possibility of parole for decades, he was shipped off to prison. Case closed, or so authorities thought. But behind those prison walls, something shifted. Whether conscience, fear, or a flicker of remorse, Gonzales began talking. In interviews with a journalist and later investigators, he unexpectedly confessed to Bridget Townsend's murder. Without any deal or promise of leniency, he provided precise details only the killer would know, and then led deputies straight to the hidden grave on the remote ranch land near his family's property. After 21 months of agony, Bridget's remains were finally recovered in late 2002. Skeletal fragments, scattered by animals and time, confirmed the worst. Her family's long nightmare of not knowing ended, only to be replaced by the raw pain of irreversible loss. Patricia Townsend later described the moment she learned her daughter's fate, relief mixed with shattering grief. The confession cracked open a cold case that had baffled investigators. Now, with a body and a self-incriminating guide to the crime scene, prosecutors in Medina County prepared to seek the ultimate penalty. What began as a missing person investigation had become capital murder, and Ramiro Gonzales' path to death row was set. By late 2002, Ramiro Gonzales was locked away serving 2 life sentences for the aggravated kidnapping and sexual assault of Florence Tate. Behind bars, something began to change. Influenced by prison ministry, a preacher sharing the Bible, stories of redemption, Gonzales felt the weight of his unspoken secret crushing him. One day, without warning or deal, he approached authorities and uttered words that stunned them. "I know where Bridget Townsend is." Investigators, skeptical after nearly 2 years of dead ends, listened as Gonzales calmly recounted the nightmare. He described the exact location, a remote, cedar-choked spot near his family's ranch, the shallow grave he'd dug in rocky soil. He detailed Bridget's jewelry, the clothing she wore that night, even the .357 revolver used to end her life. Details no one outside the killer could know. Then, in a chilling field trip, Gonzales led deputies across the rugged terrain straight to the site. There, scattered by time and animals, they recovered her remains, skeletal fragments confirming the horror. Back in interrogation, Gonzales provided a full, signed confession, admitting the abduction, assault, and murder in unflinching detail. No coercion, no plea bargain. Just a voluntary unburdening that closed a cold case and reopened wounds for Bridget's family. What drove this unexpected confession, guilt, faith, or something deeper, would haunt the case for years. But one thing was now undeniable. The mystery was over, and Ramiro Gonzales had sealed his own fate. Behind the crime lies a childhood shattered beyond repair, one that experts would later describe as off the charts in trauma. Ramiro Gonzales was born in 1982 to a 17-year-old mother struggling with severe addiction. While pregnant, she abused alcohol, inhalants, and drugs, once even overdosing in an attempt to end the pregnancy. Abandoned at birth, Ramiro was raised by his grandparents on a remote, desolate Texas ranch, in a crowded cinderblock home where supervision was non-existent. Left alone for long hours, he became vulnerable to unimaginable harm. Starting as young as age 6, a male cousin sexually abused him repeatedly. At 12 or 13, an older woman assaulted him, resulting in the birth of a child. Physical abuse, neglect, and early exposure to drugs and alcohol compounded the damage. Possible fetal alcohol spectrum disorder went undiagnosed, along with the deep scars of abandonment and loss. Especially after his beloved aunt, the one source of affection, died in a car crash when he was 15. No intervention came. No therapy, no protection. By his late teens, plunged into grief and addiction, Ramiro spiraled. Just 71 days after turning 18, he committed the crime that would define the rest of his life. September 2006, the 38th District Court in Medina County, Texas, becomes the stage for Ramiro Gonzales' capital murder trial. The evidence is overwhelming and damning. His own detailed confession, the precise location of Bridget Townsend's remains he led police to, the .357 revolver, and chilling testimony from survivor Florence Tate, who identified him as her attacker. The defense doesn't dispute the facts. Instead, they paint a portrait of profound brokenness, extreme childhood trauma, abandonment, repeated sexual abuse starting at age 6, becoming a father at 12 due to assault, untreated fetal alcohol exposure, and attachment disorders. No brain damage, they concede, but a young man wired for survival in a world that never protected him. Prosecutors pivot to Texas law's unique requirement for death sentences, proof of future dangerousness. Their star witness, forensic psychiatrist Dr. Edward Grippin, diagnoses Gonzales with antisocial personality disorder and predicts high recidivism risk. Grippin cites statistics and clinical impressions, declaring flatly that Gonzales would pose a continuing threat, even in prison. The jury, 12 Medina County residents, deliberates guilt for just 25 minutes before returning a verdict guilty of capital murder. In the punishment phase, the same jury weighs life without parole against death. Grippin's testimony looms large. After hours of deliberation, they choose death, sealing Gonzales' fate at age 23. Years later, Grippin would revisit his opinion, admitting he'd been wrong, that Gonzales had profoundly changed. But in that 2006 courtroom, the prediction of a lifelong monster carried the day, sending a traumatized young man to Texas's death row. For nearly 18 years, Ramiro Gonzales lived in solitary confinement at the Allen B. Polinsky unit in Livingston, Texas, a concrete tomb where death row inmates spend 23 hours a day in 6x9-foot cells, staring at gray walls under fluorescent lights. Appeals dragged on and failed repeatedly. Lawyers argued the trial's future dangerousness. Finding relied on discredited science and incomplete evidence of his childhood trauma. But courts upheld the sentence. Behind bars, something extraordinary happened. Gonzales embraced faith, earning a theology certificate with near-perfect grades. He became coordinator of the prison's faith-based program, mentoring other inmates, practicing daily meditation and yoga, adopting a vegetarian diet, and writing heartfelt letters of apology to Bridget's family. In 2021, even prosecution psychiatrist Dr. Edward Grappon revisited Gonzales, retracting his 2006 testimony. He is not the same person, no longer a future danger, a profound transformation, yet one the system refused to credit. June 26, 2024. The date carried cruel symbolism. It would have been Bridget Townsend's 42nd birthday. In the weeks leading up, Ramiro Gonzales' final appeals were denied one by one. The Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles voted unanimously against clemency. The courts, including the U.S. Supreme Court, refused to intervene, rejecting arguments about his remarkable rehabilitation, the retracted, future dangerousness, testimony, and the childhood trauma that had never been fully presented at trial. At 6:00 p.m., Gonzales was wheeled on a gurney into the stark, sterile execution chamber at the Huntsville unit. White walls, one-way glass separating witnesses, the faint smell of antiseptic. Strapped down, IV lines inserted, he turned his head toward the viewing room. His last words were measured and heartfelt. He apologized repeatedly to Bridget's family. "I can't put into words the pain I have caused y'all. I'm so sorry." He thanked his supporters, expressed love for his own family, and ended with quiet resolve, "Warden, I'm ready." At 6:26 p.m., the lethal dose of pentobarbital began flowing. Gonzales took several deep breaths, then fell still. He was pronounced dead at 6:50 p.m. Texas's second execution of 2024. Outside, Bridget's mother, Patricia Townsend, spoke to reporters. She called the day joyful, for finally seeing justice, yet admitted a lingering sadness. When asked about Gonzales' apology, she was firm. "It doesn't mean anything to me. He took my daughter. For one family, closure. For another, profound loss. And for the state, the irreversible final chapter in a story that began on a cold night 23 years earlier." Conclusion and reflection. As the lights dim on Ramiro Gonzales' story, we're left with questions that linger long after the execution chamber door closes. Was he a monster born, or one meticulously forged by a lifetime of unimaginable trauma? Abandoned at birth by an addicted mother, sexually abused from age 6, forced into fatherhood at 12, drowned in grief and drugs with no one to pull him out. Experts called his childhood one of the worst they'd ever seen. Nature or nurture? The debate rages on. And perhaps the harder question, can a human being truly change on death row? For nearly 18 years, Gonzales did everything society claims to want from a prisoner. He found faith, studied theology with near-perfect grades, mentored others, practiced daily meditation, became vegetarian, and lived without a single violent incident. Even the prosecution's own psychiatrist, the man whose 2006 testimony sent him to death, returned in 2021 to say unequivocally, he is not the same person. He is no longer a future danger. Yet Texas law looked only backward to the terrified, addicted 18-year-old who committed a horrific crime on a freezing night in 2001. The man who emerged after 2 decades of reflection and remorse was deemed irrelevant. On June 26, 2024, what would have been Bridget Townsend's 42nd birthday, the state executed the changed man for the sins of the boy he once was. Justice was served, the courts declared. Bridget's family finally received the closure they'd waited 23 years for. But at what cost? When redemption is proven yet ignored, what message does that send about forgiveness, rehabilitation, and the possibility of second chances? Was justice truly served? Or did we simply silence a voice that had finally learned to speak of remorse? That's for you to decide. If this case moved you, drop a like, share your thoughts in the comments. Was Ramiro Gonzales born a monster, or made into one? Should profound transformation on death row ever matter when a life has been taken? And hit subscribe we dive into more cases that challenge everything we think we know about crime, punishment, and the human capacity for change. Thank you for watching. Until next time.